You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
Welcome to Inside the Village, a big week in the province of Ontario. Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media, as Ontarians head to the polls. Are you, Jack? Are you excited?
I'm excited. Yeah, I always love elections. They're fun to cover.
Now, are you an advance poll guy or a day of guy?
No, I like to go the morning of to cast my vote. That's been the way I do it.
All right, I like it. Any predictions, or are you not a prediction guy?
No, I'm not going to get. We're going to cover it as it happens, and we'll let the predictions come true.
We'll leave that to the prognosticators, as they say. The first word to Frisco. Several episodes ago, we had the pleasure of speaking with Scott Hamilton, a city councillor in Cambridge, who had a very unique motion that he tabled. What's the update?
Yeah, Scott came on the program to talk about this unique idea of offering free public transit on all election days, municipal, provincial, federal, so that people could get to the polls if they didn't have a way to get there. And I guess recently at the last city council meeting in Cambridge, they had unanimous support from fellow councillors to have this go through. They're going to ask the region of Waterloo to make this happen. And I wonder if we'll look back many years from now, if this is offered all over the country on election days, if we can go back to Cambridge, Ontario, and Cambridge Today, which reported it first, and remember that that's where it all started.
Very cool. Good for Scott. Coming up on Inside the Village, we mentioned Ontarians head to the poll on June 2nd, and we will speak with the leader of the Ontario New Democratic Party, Andrea Horwath, next on Inside the Village.
From newsmakers to celebrities to other prominent guests, you'll find them all on Village Media's new interview series, Up Close and Personal. Join host Scott Sexsmith as he goes one-on-one with well-known Canadians to hear their story. Up Close and Personal. Look for it on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village alongside Michael Friscolanti. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Big week in Ontario as we head to the polls, and this is kind of a special segment of Inside the Village for us as we focus solely on the election.
Yeah, when the campaign first kicked off, we reached out to all four of the main party leaders, Stephen Del Duca's Liberals, Doug Ford's Conservatives, Andrea Horwath's NDP, and Mike Schreiner's Green Party, basically giving them an open invitation to come on Inside the Village. You know, our chain of news sites has millions of readers every week. We have a pretty big audience on the podcast, and we wanted to say, you know what, come on, pitch us your vision for Ontario. I guess you could say we batted 2 for 4. 2 of the 4 agreed to come on. Andrea Horwath agreed to join us, and so did Mike Schreiner. So that's today's episode. We're going to listen to hear both of them.
2 for 4 if we were baseball players at the plate, that would be pretty good.
Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. Yes, something like that. And we didn't want to play favorites, so we went alphabetically that H comes before S. And with that, we're very pleased now to be joined by the leader of the Ontario NDP, Andrea Horwath. Andrea, welcome to Inside the Village. It's great to see you today.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks for the invitation.
First off, unfortunately, last week you caught COVID. I guess the first question would be, how was it? How are you feeling? And it must be great to be back on the campaign trail.
Yeah, it was. It was COVID. So, like so many other people in Ontario, I had symptoms. I was testing positive, and so I did what everybody does, what we ask people to do, which is go into isolation for a couple of days in the middle of a campaign, which added to the pain, I have to admit. But glad to be not testing positive anymore and completely gone with the symptoms and back up on the hustings, which is awesome.
And we can definitely see that you're back there. We see the campaign bus. That's quite the background.
Yes, and it's never, it keeps you awake, let's put it that way. Never a dull moment.
That's for sure. I just want to go back to 2018 for a minute. It was a huge year for you and your party. You won 40 seats in the general election, first NDP member to be named leader of the official opposition in more than 2 decades. But despite your party's big breakthrough, I remember there being a sense that this was maybe a missed opportunity. You know, you were head-to-head in the polls with Doug Ford going into Election Day, and some people felt that this was the chance for the NDP to finally win. When you look back on that, do you look back on it as a missed opportunity?
I think that the people of Ontario always make the right decision when it comes to how they vote. Certainly in the last election, we were coming from third party. We weren't the official opposition at the time. We were the third party in the legislature. And so would I have preferred that we'd have formed government, absolutely. But we're going for it this time as well. So hopefully on June 2nd, people will see that there is a party that's going to be in it for you, a leader that's going to fix the things that are broken, and put people, everyday people, at the front of the agenda, making sure that the things that matter most are addressed.
Sure. And I know you don't spend a lot of time staring at polls, but the latest polls aren't on your side at the moment, right? They're talking about another PC majority. Some even have the Liberals ahead of you. What is the path to victory for you, Andrea?
Well, I'm going to continue in these next couple of days to show people that they can have hope for the future. And I've just, as I said, came from a campaign event, and yet another person approached me to say that they're losing hope. They're losing hope that things are ever going to change. And when it comes to big issues like our hospitals, where we have hallway medicine, where big cuts have really hurt people, where people aren't getting the kind of healthcare that they need and deserve, we can fix that. We can change that. And in order to do so, we can't go back to the Liberals who really did bring us hallway medicine and squeezed our hospitals and fired 1,600 nurses. And conservative cuts are not going to fix our healthcare system. So there's a lot at stake, let's put it that way, in this election. And I'm going to continue to show people that you can have a premier and a government that prioritizes the same things that you prioritize. Unfortunately, it's a tough conversation, because a lot of people have given up hope, and that's never good. So we're trying to provide people with that hope and let them know that some of these big issues can be fixed.
We definitely want to get back to healthcare. And you talk about hope. One of the issues that I think has a lot of people feeling a little hopeless, a little helpless right now is the cost of living, right? Inflation is through the roof. People are seeing their prices at the grocery store and the gas pumps keep going up. I mean, what can an NDP government do to help a person who's struggling and standing at the grocery store saying, can I afford this today?
Yeah, the choices people are having to make are just heartbreaking. We talked about hope a little bit, but the fact that young people are giving up hope of ever owning their own homes, that they're stuck in their parents' basements much longer yet again. Into their 30s, and that's not good for anybody, for the young people or the parents, for that matter. But there's a couple of things. I mean, it's about making sure that some things that we can have an impact on are made more affordable. So things like housing, things like rent. So bringing rent controls back, making sure that we're taking speculation out of the market and helping young people to afford their first home with help with the down payment, but also making sure that those first homes are actually available, so that we have those starter homes, those missing middle homes rather, that help young people to get their foot in the door. But it's also about acknowledging that people are paying out of pocket for dental care. They're paying out of pocket for prescription drugs. They're paying out of pocket for mental health care. And I just want to take 1 minute to say, at the press conference I had this morning, yet another mom approached me about the crisis in mental health with young people particularly, but literally, and this is the absolute fact, every single time I'm out in the community doing a press conference, somebody from the neighborhood comes over and starts a conversation about mental health. So mental health and prescription drugs need to be paid for through your OHIP card. They need to be part of our public healthcare system. That not only takes a big burden off of people's pocketbook, but it also makes sure that people can be as well as possible, can stay healthy, don't have to go to emergency or to see a doctor when they're not well, because we're helping them to stay well. So things like that, things like finally tackling our auto insurance rates, which are way too high, and in a province where we have the fewest accidents and yet the highest amount of insurance, we need to really wrestle that one to the ground. It's a bugaboo for a lot of people.
Now, you mentioned, I mean, certainly mental health is a huge issue. I hear the same thing. We all hear the same thing. We all have families and friends who are dealing with that. But let's take a closer look at some of those things in your platform regarding healthcare. You know, you're talking about bringing counseling and therapy services under the umbrella of OHIP. The NDP would reduce waitlist times for children's mental health for 30 days, and you'd hire 30,000 nurses and 10,000 PSWs, which, on paper all sounds wonderful. I guess the voters, and I think a lot of people wonder, can you pay for that? How do we pay for that?
Well, we can't afford not to pay for that, because if we don't pay for that, then we're going to see more and more privatization of our healthcare system, which people don't want. We don't want to see conservatives or liberals, for that matter, privatizing more of our healthcare system. And so our plan includes $9.8 billion in the first 3 years to address that very issue, the mental health, the human healthcare resources that need to be put into place, the staffing. And so we have already thousands of people who have left healthcare because they're burnt out, because they're exhausted, because they're being disrespected by their government with their low wage policy, Bill 124. We're going to scrap Bill 124. We're going to ask some of those healthcare workers to return, particularly those nurses who are the most skilled, really, who have the most experience. We're going to ask them to come back and help us with training and with mentoring. We have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people who are trained in other jurisdictions, internationally trained healthcare workers, doctors and nurses that sat on the sidelines. We're forced to sit on the sidelines during COVID when we could have had them helping us. So making sure those accreditations are happening more quickly and opening up opportunity for new people in our healthcare system, but not just the recruitment, but the retention, making sure those are decent jobs, full-time work that's respected, work that's decently paid, where people can go to work knowing that they're not going to have to be stuck being the only person on that shift, on that floor, in that ward, which I'm hearing from nurses and other healthcare workers all the time. And it's exhausting and it's actually terrifying for them.
Can I ask you this? I mean, we've dissected the pandemic and politicians' reactions to it and things we could have done better, maybe done with things that we did well. If you could do one thing, if you had been the premier when this happened, what's one major thing you would have done differently than Doug Ford?
I would have done much better in terms of communications and keeping people up to speed with what was going on, listening to the science table. But you cannot pretend that you're going to help seniors in long-term care with an iron ring and then simply walk away from them and let them die by the thousands. 4,540 seniors died in long-term care because Doug Ford lied about the iron ring, then refused to hire the PSWs, refused to do what Quebec did and what BC did in terms of hiring more staff, refused to quickly address the staff that were moving between facilities. There were some really important things that should have and could have been done quickly and weren't. I would have protected the schools. I would have reduced class sizes. Our kids were out of classrooms longer than any other kids in the entire continent. That's because Doug Ford didn't want to invest the money in reducing class sizes and making our kids safe and providing the rapid testing like they promised they were going to do in the second wave. So I can go on. I know you said one thing, but there was more than one thing that went wrong. But you're right. Public health stepped up in so many places. There are things that were really done well, and we have to acknowledge those things too. But let's learn the lessons because, boy, we know for sure this is not the last pandemic, and we didn't learn the lessons from SARS. And we need to do that.
Andrea, if we can talk for a moment about Northern healthcare. As you well know, the healthcare system in parts of Northern Ontario has reached absurd levels of insufficiency. In Thessalon, for example, just outside of Sault Ste. Marie, the only doctor in town recently packed up and left, and many other communities dealing with the very same types of situation, leaving people without proper medical care. The Band-Aid solutions have been patchwork at best and, as we all know, very costly. Your platform is talking about hiring 300 more doctors for Northern Ontario, but how do you even begin to address the glaring inequality between healthcare in the north versus healthcare in Southern Ontario?
No, it's a really important question, Scott, and it's something that I've observed for many years as I've been through the north. I've been in Northern Ontario, all parts of Northern Ontario, northwest, northeast, the far north. Places like Sioux Lookout. I got a call from the mayor of Red Lake not too long ago because they had to close their emergency ward for a weekend because they didn't have the locums. They didn't have the medical staff, the doctors there to keep their emergency ward open. So people had to, if they had an emergency, literally would have to go 2.5 hours to Kenora to try to get emergency services. I mean, it doesn't even calculate in terms of the time that it takes to get from one place to the other. So yes, it is some of the staffing pieces that I've talked about. It's making sure that we have community health centers, nurse practitioner-led clinics, as well as part of the mix. But it's also making sure that northern communities have the community life, right? The thriving community life that allows and encourages people to come and bring their families there as medical professionals. So if your arena is being shut down, or you can't replace your arena that's falling down because the provincial government is not prepared to help cover the cost of that, because we know that northern communities have very low tax basis in terms of capacity for capital projects and for operating funding, then we're not going to be able to attract those folks and keep them there. If you're wanting to build a community center where seniors can get some exercise, where young people can engage in activities, where family can have some fun together, if you can't get those things done, how are you going to encourage families to take up shop? If you're shutting down northern schools and forcing kids on buses for longer and longer amounts of time during the school year, how does a doctor decide that he's going to set up shop in a place like Bessalon? Or how is a doctor or a nurse going to come to a community when there isn't a school, or when there are no other? So, for example, there's no job for their spouse. So it's about the economy in the north and supporting northern communities, about making sure we understand northern communities are more than just healthcare. They're whole communities, and those whole communities have to be sustainable and great places for doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals to raise their families.
The north is also where we're seeing a disproportionate number of people dying of toxic drugs. The overdose crisis hits northern Ontario, but it's hitting all parts of Ontario. And it's a very serious issue that we've been talking about now for years. And I'm just wondering, how do we even begin to turn the corner on the number of people who are dying of overdose? They use the word overdose, but it's not entirely accurate. These are people dying because the drug supply is so badly poisoned. How would an NDP government start to turn the corner on that?
That's a really great question, Mike, and you're right. There's a complete tragedy unfolding in so many communities. I don't know if you've heard about the memorial to lost lives in Sudbury with the crosses, but stark picture of the loss of life that's happening there. But you're right, it's everywhere, and it's not new. Smaller northern communities. I've talked to many of the mayors over the last couple of years, and more they were flagging two issues. One is the mental health and addictions, particularly addictions, but also homelessness in their communities. And these things are all tied together, of course, as you know. But first of all, I wouldn't be capping the number of safe consumption sites in Ontario, which is what the Ford government did. I wouldn't be cutting in mental health and supports. We know that a lot of times when people don't get the mental health supports that they need, they start to self-medicate, and that becomes a downward spiral. We would be making sure that the investments are available for mental health services all across Ontario. We have a very robust plan where you get mental health care from your OHIP card with your OHIP card, and we also increase access and availability of mental health services. But you've also raised the important issue about the poison drug supply and about the criminalization of people who are facing addictions, which are health problems. And we know the chiefs of police across Ontario and across Canada have raised real concerns around the discussion we need to be having about the safe drug supply and how do we make that drug supply safe, and also the decriminalization of possession for use narcotics. I mean, it's just, and opioids. It's something we need to help people and not ostracize them and not make things worse. We need to provide what they need to be able to have a chance to live and manage their addiction.
And part of the problem with that we're seeing, and we had some great reporting done at our chain recently about how Toronto area street gangs are really branching out into rural and northern Ontario. They're taking advantage of the opioid crisis, and they're literally everywhere. They're in First Nations communities in northern Ontario. They're in smaller towns and cities in rural and northern Ontario. And we see it almost on a weekly basis. We see the police busting someone who's from the GTA. So there is a criminal element to this too, right? How do we begin to tackle that?
You're right. There is a criminal element, and the reduced capacity, let's put it that way, of policing services for smaller communities and for northern communities it just adds to the vulnerability of communities to these kinds of predatory behaviors of gangs and drug dealers. And so it's a number of things. It's making sure that the resources are available when the bad actors are coming to town, but there also has to be some real attention paid to, why are these gangs continuing to grow and spread their influence? How is it that we continue to see young people be more attracted to gang life than striking out and building a life that's part of the societal norm, if you will? And I think there are real important things that we need to talk about in that regard. I mean, we have had many reports that have been issued. The roots of youth violence, the roots of youth crime is one of the ones that I think about. But when people don't have a connection to their community, when they don't have any hope for the future, when they can see an easy way to make some money with a gang, then it becomes a pathway that's the pathway of least resistance, if you will. We have to really think carefully about how do we give young people hope for the future and connect them into activities and environments that they can thrive in, that they can have some self-confidence and some belonging in.
Andrea, we have a lot of readers in the York Region and Simcoe County areas, a lot of them really caring about one particular issue, the Bradford Bypass. It's a proposed east-west highway that, as you know, will connect Highway 400 to Highway 404. Now, you've promised to kill the construction plans if elected premier, but if you do, how do you deal with the severe traffic congestion in that area that just seems to be getting worse and worse?
There's no doubt that there's issues that we need to deal with in terms of traffic flow, but what we should not ever be doing is pretending that decisions around addressing traffic flow and congestion should be traded off against our responsibility to protect places like the Holland Marsh, for example. So we need to be really, really thoughtful about how we deal with congestion. And I know it's funny because I sometimes get criticized by one of my opponents, who's going to remain nameless, that I don't want to build highways. So that's just not true. I don't have a problem with highways if they're actually going to fix the congestion, if they're going to be more safe for drivers, if they're going to address those kinds of needs. And so I think about Highway 7, I think about, Highway 3. There are many highways, 11, 17, that we've talked about that need to be addressed. But let's not pretend that we didn't have that wild storm that we just had. And let's not pretend that the climate emergency isn't upon us, because it is. And so we have to be a lot more creative, a lot more thoughtful, and a lot more committed to utilizing existing infrastructure and building infrastructure that doesn't threaten our progress on fighting climate change.
Mm-hmm. We know we're taking a lot of your time. We're almost finished. We appreciate it.
My assistant just gave me the wrap-up.
Yeah, she gave me the wrap-up for sure. We'll get there. I mean, I think it's a fair question. I mean, you've been at this a long time, and you've given a lot to public service. What happens if this doesn't work out for you? If you don't win this election, do you know? Are you going to, if you become the opposition leader again, will you serve? What's your plan? Do you have one if you don't win this?
Well, I'm certainly going to wait for the people of Ontario, the good people of Ontario, to make their decision. But I can tell you, before I was elected, I fought for people. I'm always a fighter on behalf of people, and that's part of who I am. It's in my DNA. So regardless of the decision that's made on the 2nd, I hope to be able to fight to actually implement the things that people want to see changed from the Premier's chair. If that doesn't happen, then whatever it is, I will be always fighting for people.
Andrea, you've been kind enough to give us a lot of your time today, so I think it's only fair that we ask, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to say to voters who are still undecided about who to support on June 2nd?
Yeah, I would just say this: 6 to 7 out of 10 Ontarians don't want to see Doug Ford with a second term in office, because we know that Conservative cuts are going to hurt, and they're not going to fix the things that matter most to people. So what I would say to folks is, when you look at your options for the vote, the New Democrats have a very, very experienced team. We came in with 40 seats from the last election. The Liberals only had 7. We have the experience, but we also came first or second in 100 out of 124 ridings. So this time, in the last election, if you want to stop Doug Ford from getting a second mandate and making more cuts that are going to hurt you even more, then together we can stop that from happening with a vote for the NDP.
Well, you're into the home stretch to June 2nd and the date that we all go to the polls. Andrea Horwath, leader of the Ontario NDP party, thanks for doing this today and good luck.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Mike.
She had my heart, oh, very nearly.
For the latest in in-depth features and enterprise journalism from your local writers at Village Media, be sure to check out The Big Read. The Big Read. It's the full story behind the headlines. Look for The Big Read on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley.
Welcome back to Inside the Village. Scott and Frisco here talking Ontario Votes 2022. We just had a great chat with the leader of the Ontario NDP party, Andrea Horwath. And up next, it's Mike Schreiner from the Green Party.
Yeah, and if you watch the leaders' debate and you listen to the punditry afterwards, people were very impressed with Mike Schreiner, how he did in the debate. It's the first time he'd ever participated in a leaders' debate because A, he was elected to Queen's Park, and B, he has a full slate of candidates, which made him qualify for the leaders' debate. So I think, the Greens really feel like there's some momentum on their sails right now. So, they're really pushing hard to maybe double or triple the amount of MPPs they have at Queen's Park.
We're very pleased now to be joined on Inside the Village by Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party of Ontario and MPP for Guelph. Mike, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Yes, Scott, Michael, pleasure to be on today. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, let's fire it up and get it going. Let's start from the beginning. You were born in the United States and grew up on your family's grain farm in rural Kansas, and now decades later, you're running to be Premier of Ontario. How did you get from there to here? And in particular, Mike, what was it about growing up on a farm that kind of helped shape the politician that you are today?
Well, first of all, I moved to Ontario for love in the mid-1990s and fell in love with Ontario and especially Guelph, where I live. Growing up on a farm, I wanted to start a local food business. And everyone said, oh, you have to go to Guelph if you're going to do that. And yes, Guelph was a perfect place to start local food businesses. And so just to really fallen in love with Ontario and, been really a pleasure to raise my two daughters here and make my life here. And so I like to say to people, I chose the best city and the best province and the best country in the world. And I'm very pleased with that choice. And in terms of growing up on a farm, I grew up loving nature. I spent hours, we have a creek that runs through our farm. I spent hours fishing and playing and camping and, just hiking, etc. And so, but I think between that and then my dad's always insistence that everything we do on the farm was to build for 10, 20 years down the road, that we were stewards of the land. And my mom was a school teacher in a small little tiny farm community in the middle of nowhere. And she always taught me that, we're stewards of our community and we have to care for the people in our community. And so I think I've carried those lessons from my parents into politics. And I think it's also, I think it was in university, I really kind of made the shift from not only the need to protect farmland and nature and water, but also to, becoming a bit more of an environmentalist as I started realizing just the climate crisis that was emerging and that we needed to take action to crush climate pollution, to really protect the people and places we love in this province. And that's what's really informed my approach to politics.
Mike, I think you mentioned before we got on the air that you're in Parry Sound, Muskoka campaigning today for the local candidate there, and you're at a hotel. Is that a green wall behind you? Did you ask for that when you checked in?
I do have a green wall behind me, and it was I did not ask for the green wall, but certainly happy to have the green wall behind me.
It's like it's fate.
We're going to paint Parry Sound, Muskoka green.
Yeah, I thought you brought it with you for the interview. That would be amazing. Mike, you don't live in a fantasy land. Obviously, you're a straight shooter and an honest guy. You're the first to admit that you're not going to become the Premier of Ontario on June 2nd. But I'm wondering, what does victory look like for you and your party? What would be a celebration for you?
I think increasing our seat count at Queen's Park and increasing our vote total across the province. I tell people, I think I'm qualified to be the Premier. And I would say coming out of the leaders debate, A lot of people are saying, we wish you were going to be the premier. But I also know there's a process that a new party has to go through. It's very similar to starting a business, or I've also started nonprofit organizations. You have to build over time. And if you look at Green parties in provinces across the country, much like the Ontario Greens, it's electing that first seat and then securing the second seat and then building from there. And, the PEI Greens now are the official opposition in a minority legislature. You recently had the BC Greens with 3 Green MLAs holding the balance of power in their provincial legislature. And so a lot of media observers have said, the Ontario Greens, we've had an outsized influence at Queen's Park over the last 4 years. We've punched well above our weight. And I think we can even have more influence to improve people's lives by increasing the size of our caucus. And I also think Green MPPs, and this isn't just my approach, I see this in other provincial parties as well, a real commitment to putting people before politics and party, and being really strong constituency advocates for the people who live in your riding, and willing to work across party lines and collaborate even with parties that you disagree with to make sure you get things done for the people in your community.
Mike, I think a lot of people still assume that the Green Party is kind of a one-hit wonder, if you will, that your only focus is the environment. What do you say to those people to explain that isn't the case?
Well, I mean, first of all, we are offering a plan to address the climate crisis that also addresses people's affordability concerns, especially when it comes to transportation, housing, and food. And we have a plan to set Ontario's economy up for success, to create new and better job opportunities in the emerging markets of the new climate economy. 65 million jobs will be created globally this decade in low carbon goods and services. I want Ontario to lead that. I think we are perfectly positioned to be the global leader, but we need a policy and political framework to do that. And then I would say the Ontario Greens have been leading on a number of issues. It was a year ago, we put out a housing affordability strategy that Canada's largest circulation newspaper called a masterclass plan in delivering the solutions we need to address housing affordability. We've been getting support from across the political spectrum for our housing affordability plan. And we also were the first party in Ontario history to put forward a standalone plan to address the mental health crisis that so many people are experiencing. That it was a growing issue pre-pandemic, but I think coming out of the pandemic is especially an important issue. And we have a plan to expand mental health services through OHIP so that it's affordable for people, accessible, and they can access the comprehensive care they need, with a firm funding commitment to lower the wait times for youth mental health. Right now, 28,000 young people are waiting on average 18 months, sometimes as long as 2 years to access mental health services. And we know the longer you wait, the more acute experiences you have. And so we have a firm funding commitment to reduce those wait times to less than 30 days as we put forward a plan to build caring, connected, climate-ready communities.
I'm glad you brought up the affordable housing issue, Mike. I was going to ask you about that. I remember reading a lot of positive things about your plan. People were impressed with the level of detail. Can you speak to that? I mean, obviously the cost of living is a huge issue for people in Ontario. It's what everyone's talking about right now, and affordable housing is one of them. What are the specifics of your plan?
Yeah, there are 4 key components to the plan. The first one is to end the rampant speculation you're seeing in that housing market through a vacant homes tax, non-resident speculation tax, and a multiple home speculation tax. Our belief is that homes should be for people, not speculators. And we've got to give first-time home buyers a level playing field and not competing against, especially deep-pocketed corporations that are oftentimes buying, in some cases, hundreds of single-family homes at a time. The second component is changing our zoning laws to make it easier to increase housing supply through our Yes in My Backyard campaign, basically making it as of right for people to be able to build duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes, make it easier to do laneway suites and secondary suites and basement apartments and tiny homes, so people have more housing choices and options within our existing built environment, because we obviously can't continue to keep paving over the farmland that feeds us, the wetlands that clean our drinking water, protect us from flooding, the nature that helps mitigate these climate-fueled extreme weather events we're facing. And then as part of that plan is to do pre-zoning along transit corridors and main streets so we can build missing middle. We get past this taller sprawl discussion and start building gentle density, missing middle housing for people. That's how we can ramp up supply affordability while protecting the places we love. And then the third component is actually having government get back into housing. Both the provincial and federal government got out of housing in the mid-1990s. The crisis has been getting worse ever since. We've put forward a fully costed plan that shows how government can support nonprofit and co-op housing providers to build 182,000 deeply affordable homes over the next decade with 60,000 permanent supportive housing spaces with wraparound mental health, addictions, and other supports, because we know that every $10 invested in permanent supportive housing saves government $21.72 in other costs, such as healthcare, social service, criminal justice costs. And then the final part of it is the connection between housing and transportation. We have to stop the sprawl to end the commute. People simply can't afford these long, expensive, soul-crushing commutes where they have to, drive until they qualify for a mortgage. Let's build communities where people can live, work, and play, shop locally so they have more time with their family and friends. And so they reduce commuting costs, which hurts them in the pocketbook, but it also increases air pollution and climate pollution, which we absolutely need to reduce in order to, improve our quality of life.
One of the things your party's talked about, and I haven't heard as much from the other parties, is the issue of social assistance and whether it's time now to be raising the amount of money we're giving to people on social assistance or on ODSP payments. I know where you live in Guelph. Guelph Today did a recent feature story, really interesting piece about how it has not been raised in a long, long time and how that's impacting the people in Guelph who depend on it. How would we pay for that, Mike? I think in theory people would say, yes, we should be raising the amount of money we're giving to people on ODSP, for example. But how do we pay for it?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll just say let's end legislated poverty in Ontario. We are forcing people with disabilities to live on $1,100 a month. I mean, the average apartment in Guelph, for example, is $1,800, and it's like that in most communities across the province, and in some of our larger urban centers, even higher than that. You simply can't survive. And poverty is not only really hurting the quality of life for people being forced to live in legislated poverty, but it also costs the province $33 billion a year. So we've said, let's double social assistance rates immediately to bring people with disabilities at least up to the low income cutoff level so they can live a life of dignity. And it will improve quality of life in our communities and address that $33 billion that's costing the province. How would we pay for it? You know what? We're asking high income earners, people who earn over $200,000 a year, to pay like 1 or 2% more in taxes. And we're asking the largest corporations to pay, and the most profitable corporations to pay an additional 2%, which means Ontario's corporate tax rate would go from being the lowest in the country to kind of being average. That would raise the money we need to essentially bring people out of legislative poverty. And, some of your younger listeners may not remember Mike Harris, but your middle-aged and older listeners will. Right now, what the other parties are offering, the Conservatives and Liberals and the NDP in their first year, would actually maintain social assistance rates at a lower level than when Mike Harris was premier of this province, adjusted for inflation. That is just wrong. And so we're saying immediately double social assistance rates. And I'd like to say our leadership on this issue has pushed the other parties. The NDP have amended their platform, to their credit, to double rates in year 2 of their mandate. And even Doug Ford said, hey, you know what? I hear you. We'll raise them 5%, which is still way too low. But it does show you the leadership I believe the Ontario Greens bring to the legislature and have brought to this campaign to get the other parties to move as well. But we know we can do better, and that's what our plan delivers.
Mike, you were elected as an MPP in the riding of Guelph back in 2018, the first ever Green candidate to win a seat at Queen's Park. Looking back on those 4 years, how do you think you made the biggest difference in the legislature? Maybe what went differently for Ontarians because there was a single Green Party voice in the room?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank my neighbors in Guelph for making history. Like, we did it together. And I can tell you, so many people have told me that what the people of Guelph did is improve politics in Ontario, because we've brought new solutions to old problems to Queen's Park. And so I would say the biggest difference I've made is, one, being a strong constituency MPP, to work across party lines to, make sure that people in my community have received the supports and investments we need to improve life in Guelph. And then on a provincial wide level, I would say that, I've pushed back against some of the worst excesses of the Ford government. Many of you probably know I've been highly critical of the way in which the Ford government has dismantled all of Ontario's climate action plans and are systematically dismantling environmental protections. Many of them, quite frankly, brought in by previous conservative governments, particularly the Bill Davis government. And so I just want to say to conservatives out there, do we really want to go that backwards that far? Like, these environmental protections protect the quality of life in your community. They protect your property, your lives, and livelihood. But I've been able to, help lead citizen movements and provide those citizens with a voice in the legislature. A few quick examples. When Mr. Ford wanted to open the Greenbelt Act, or the Greenbelt up for development, we pushed back against it, and they backtracked on that proposal. Same way with their changes to the Clean Water Act. When the Ford government issued a ministerial zoning order to pave over the Duffins Creek wetland with an Amazon warehouse, we pushed back and they backtracked on it. I've been able to work with the Conservatives to actually pass legislation to make life better for electric vehicle drivers. And I also helped spearhead the first bill in Ontario history that was co-sponsored by all four political parties to declare the month of August as Emancipation Month in the province. And so I think I've shown and demonstrated an ability to be critical and hold government accountable, but to also work across party lines with the other opposition parties and with government members to get things done to improve life for Ontarians. And I think it's having that balance, I think, is added an important and vital contribution to the legislature. And that's why I want more Green MPPs, because, many have said we've had an outsized influence at Queen's Park with one. Imagine how much more influence we can have with two or three to help just put forward ideas and solutions that will improve people's lives.
I appreciate that detail, Mike, because I think, and you may hear this on the campaign trail too, there's still some people who will be hesitant to feel like they might be throwing away their vote or wasting a vote on Green. And I know you've explained that, but what do you say to someone at the door who might say, you know what, I just can't do it. I feel like I'm wasting my vote.
Well, I would say vote for the Ontario you want. And if you want Green, vote Green. And we've seen huge momentum coming out of the leaders' debates, just in terms of people volunteering, people asking for signs, people making donations, people saying, hey, I'm going to vote Green. And we're just carrying forward that momentum in ridings across the province. But I think especially in, like my home in Guelph, but Parry Sound Muskoka, University of Rosedale, Dufferin-Caledon, Beaches East York, a whole host of ridings where we're seeing, our really strong on the ground campaigns. And I think it's because the leaders' debate was the first time that a really large number of Ontarians really had a chance to realize that the Ontario Greens vision of building caring, connected, climate-ready communities was really aligned with their values and the Ontario they want. And the fact that we're providing the leadership to push for that really resonates with people.
Mm-hmm. Well, we appreciate all your time, Mike. So I'll just ask you one last question. I know you have to run. You have a lot of campaigning to do. This is a dumb question, as many of mine are. But are we too late, Mike? I mean, you have focused your career and your passion on the environment and climate change. And are we able to turn this tide? Is there things we can do to fight this climate crisis in a meaningful way?
Well, Michael, there are no dumb questions, first of all. And second of all, I would say yes. And people say I'm overly optimistic. So I want to be honest with people. You know me, I'm a straight shooter. There is climate change baked in right now. I mean, we've seen it this month alone. I mean, you have the significant flooding in northwestern Ontario, particularly in Kenora District. You have this extreme storm we had, particularly hitting Uxbridge and the Ottawa region, but across southern Ontario. And now we're having extreme heat warnings, and it's only May. Can't imagine what it's going to be like in July and August. So we know that there is climate change baked in. That's why the Ontario Greens have put forward a plan to spend $2 billion a year, quite frankly, supporting municipalities to make sure that our infrastructure is resilient and climate ready. I mean, we still have people in the Ottawa region who don't have power. It's been like, 10 days or so longer now. And so we definitely have to make those investments in making sure our infrastructure can withstand the hammer blows of climate change. But we still have time to reduce the worst of it and mitigate the severity of it. And that's why I'm so proud of the Ontario Greens plan that shows how we can crush climate pollution, address people's cost of living concerns, and set our economy up for success.
Mike, Election Day quickly approaching, coming up June 2nd when Ontarians head to the polls. Enjoy Parry Sound, Muskoka. Good luck come Thursday, and thanks for doing this today.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Mike Schreiner, MPP for Guelph and leader of the Green Party of Ontario, here on Inside the Village.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
All right, as we wrap things up, another episode of Inside the Village. Those were two pretty good conversations with two pretty good candidates. Now, is it just me, Frisco, or does it seem like there isn't that sense of urgency or inspiration, or maybe even interest surrounding this election?
Yeah, I don't want to, take the temperature of the whole province, but you do kind of feel that in just the average people you talk to, friends and family, kind of feel like they're not as into the issues in this election. They're not following as closely. I wonder if it's that we're just so focused on kind of coming out the other side of COVID and just kind of trying to enjoy life, and politics has sort of dominated our life, lockdown this, protest that, and those issues may be part of why we're not feeling the same level of interest. But, as a journalist, I've been to countries where people aren't allowed to vote, where elections aren't free. And so, you hate to sound lame, but I do take it seriously, the opportunity to cast a vote. And this is your one time where you get to have your say, and it's a privilege and an honor to be able to cast a vote. So let's hope that the turnout level doesn't match the kind of feeling of the interest we're feeling right now.
Yeah, let's hope so. And you're absolutely right. It is a privilege, and we encourage one and all to get out there and exercise their democratic right to do just that. All right, we will be back next week with another episode of Inside the Village. Don't forget you can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts, all over the Village Media Network, and of course at insidethevillage.ca. For Village Media Editor-in-Chief Michael Friscolanti, I'm Scott Sexsmith.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.